Can time ever stop? What is time? One thing we know is it's associated with thought. Even some philosophers recognize that. And time is something very, very strange. It seems that on this level of existence where we are, there's no escape from it, it seems, here. No matter what you do, it will get you. It will, at some point, start attacking your physical vehicle and begin to do bad things to it. I discovered it because that's what time is doing to my physical vehicle now. In other words, I am getting old. On the other hand, time enables you to do all the things that you still want to do. So that's the good side of time. The worst thing that many people could be told is you have no more time. What? Your time is up. Oh my God, I still have so much to do. And now, if we could stop time here in this dimension, it means you would not be able to do anything, because everything you do takes time. So if we stop time, you would have to be frozen. It's called frozen in time. Although there's no time, you're frozen out of whatever. So you'd have to, I can't move my hand because it requires time. 2 seconds. Can't do anything, can't drink. Everything takes time. So, I mean, you can freeze food, then time does not attack it so easily. But eventually that will also go. Don't need to go into that. So, on the one hand, time is a wonderful thing, because everything you do, experiencing things, learning things, acquiring things, exploring this and that, discovering new things. Ah, look there, oh, let's go here now. Purpose, personal purpose in life, I want this. Or you need time. And there's plenty of it, but many humans say they don't have it. They wish they had more. That's very strange. So, on the one hand, the lovely, helpful phase of time is it allows you to do things. And then, at some point, it begins to become unfriendly to you. First, time gave you a lot, and then time says, time is up. And then it begins to take things away. First it enabled you to achieve and to attain and to get, and then it takes things away. You begin to lose things. Friends, you begin to lose friends because they're getting old. Certain abilities you may lose in your body. Jogging, I don't do it anymore. So, walking, still fine. jogging is too much. So time, and then gradually, just like it does things not just to the physical vehicle, your car too. If you're an old car, the older the car is, the more things will go wrong with it. Of course, you can delay the onset of what destructive aspect of time. You can delay it. You can, through getting plenty of exercise, good nutrition, also meditation or presence practice, that really helps to delay the decay of the body, and that's a good thing. It can delay it. And there are all kinds of new things I was told about that people now do, that these strange things they take. I know some people who every day they take 30 or 40 capsules and liquids and all to delay to what the destructive aspect of time, but eventually they also have to go. You can also do things externally to repair the visible effects of time in your face, for example. You see that gravity tends to affect your face. I noticed it again this morning in the mirror. My dad had a good sense of humor, and he said at some point, I don't know how old he was, 70, that mirrors are not the same quality they used to be. And so, yes, time is inevitable. It's like you could say, you're like being on an express train. You can't get off. Well, you do get off eventually. That's when the physical vehicle goes, and you're off, maybe. But even then, perhaps there's some element of time still there. But we don't need to go there right now. We don't need to travel into the astral dimension and talk about whether there's time there. There is, but it doesn't matter. So there's no escape from time here, but now there's a very strange thing that you discover. Although time seems to affect everything, I call it out here, you can never see time. All you ever have is the present moment. In your immediate experience, there is no time. That's an interesting fact. In your immediate experience of life, there is no time. And that is, you can start thinking about it, but you don't need to. It's so simple that because it's so obvious that in your immediate experience of life is always the present moment. This. And only when you start thinking, there's time. What did I say a minute ago? How much longer is this guy going to talk? Am I going to sit here for 2 hours? Then there's time suddenly. When I say we're going to be here for 2 hours, that is a mental structure, these words, and I introduce time. And of course, it's true on this level. But on the other hand, Your experience of this evening is inseparable from the present moment. It's always now. Wow. Now, most people, they might, when I say it like this, they might think, oh, wow, that's interesting. Let me think about that. You can't think about it. It's too immediate. It's too obvious. It's always now. And then, of course, you can start talking about, well, does the past actually exist? We don't need to go there. All we need to realize is there's all for you in your immediate experience. There's only always the present moment. But this is frustrating to the ego, because when there's no longer any story where you oppose the other, where you make yourself feel superior to the other, then there's no food for the ego anymore. Hopefully you had a light meal. Otherwise, all your consciousness will be drawn into the stomach. I'm beginning to receive your questions. Thank you very much. We will, this evening, have our first session dealing with questions. If possible, write as legibly as you can. Otherwise, I'll get really irritated. And my mind will say, do they expect me to read this, to be able to read this? Why can't they write more legibly? Isn't it common sense that they should write legibly? Why do people do things like that? That would be a normal ego reaction to something that in itself is perfectly okay, because you can either read it or you can't. But the ego adds a story to it, and behind the story is always an attempt to be more right than the other person. There's always an attempt to have in some kind of superiority. It's unconscious, of course. Ego is always unconscious. And this is, alternatively, what actually I don't get irritated, as you might have guessed. If there's a paper that's not legible, I look at it, okay, I'll put this aside and give it more attention later. In the meantime, I'll read the legible ones, and then if there's time later, I'll give it more attention. There's no problem without a story. And there's no, you are not wrong and I'm not right. This is just what is. It's just a tiny example of the difference between aligning yourself to the simple isness of the present moment and imposing a story on it in the service of the self that wants to inflate itself. Indignation, irritation. They should. Why do they? Don't they know better? I said, oh, they're all stories in the service of a false sense of self. And so in presence, all this, what I sometimes call unnecessary baggage, that people manufacture mentally and emotionally, all that unnecessary baggage that really there's a heaviness to it that they carry around, doesn't arise anymore, and there's the simple, this is what is, I can either do this or I can do that, I can deal with it now, I can put it aside. No story. But this is frustrating to the ego, because when there's no longer any story where you oppose the other, where you make yourself feel superior to the other, then there's no food for the ego anymore. But there's an incredible lightness, and the lightness of being comes, and the heaviness goes out of situations. That's what the ego is, a heavy me. And even when it attempts to make itself superior, what it doesn't recognize is that all these are really forms of suffering. The ego doesn't even recognize suffering as suffering. It doesn't realize that when you get angry or irritated about somebody else's behavior and bring up a big story about it, you are actually in a state of suffering. If you were able to have attention in your body, you would notice that your body is suffering, because those things affect the smooth, harmonious working of the energy field that goes through the body. So an angry thought has an effect on the body. Small irritation already has an effect, and the body doesn't really like it. But the egoic self is not in touch with the body, so it mistakes suffering for something good. Anger can really get into this. So you can look at your own life and see where you are manufacturing unnecessary stories, both in small situations and in bigger life situations, and in situations to do with relatives, family members, partners, ex-partners, a wonderful source of egoic stories. Can talk about your ex-husband or wife for hours, either to somebody else if they're ready to listen, or in your own mind. Or you had a confrontation or an exchange with somebody yesterday, and you can go on, continue that in your mind and say so many hurtful things to the other person that unfortunately you couldn't think of in the situation. But you can relive it now, and it's almost as good as the real thing. So in that fantasy world of the mind, you can be right again and again, and the other person can be wrong again and again. How wonderful. These things are not, all this is what we call unconscious. So people don't know what they are doing. For them, that is their reality. Now can we understand why Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do"? They are unconscious. It's an automatic process of ego inflation, of ego reinforcement. It's conditioned, learned. It's part of the structure of the mind. Welcome to our live meditation. We're not going to do a technique-based meditation here, but a more natural, spontaneous meditation. So allow me to just talk you into, so to speak, the meditative state of consciousness. The two ingredients of our meditation session here are the words and the spaces between the words. Yes, there's also the visual. You see the image on the screen. But mostly it's the words that you pay attention to, and there's the silent spaces. And usually you would always just be waiting for the next thing the speaker says. But here, to enter the meditative state of consciousness, you become aware of the silent spaces too. You just notice them, like now. And you may notice that when you notice the silent spaces, for that moment, your mind also becomes silent. In other words, there is a brief cessation of thinking without loss of consciousness, like now. That is the beginning of the meditative state. And it may come as a surprise to some of you that although you probably think continuously every moment, almost every moment of your waking life, it doesn't have to be like that. You can invite into your life these still or silent spaces. In fact, it's absolutely vital, essential for any human to have some access to that inner stillness. Because that inner stillness is a source of great power and aliveness. And it's also a place where you can sense the deeper feeling of being you. The word I is used a lot. It's probably one of the most frequently used words in the language. I. And usually it refers to yourself as a, let's say, historical person, a person with a history. The history of you makes you into who you are as a person, your past. And then it includes the I, refers also, of course, to your current circumstances, whatever you identify with, whatever you derive your sense of self from, whether it's possessions, or you can derive your sense of self from your possessions. You can also derive your sense of self from your lack of possessions, which could be interpreted as either that you are worse off than other people, then you have a sense of identity there, made up of certain thoughts. Or it could be interpreted, the lack of possessions could be interpreted as, I am more spiritual than all those people who have these possessions. Which again, it's a sense of identity based on a little story in your mind. And usually the word I refers to that mental entity that consists of things that you, over a period of time throughout your life, have identified with mostly, and those things become your sense of who you are. Successes, failures, relationships, possessions, status in society, things that other people did to you, you did to other people. All those things become mental stories, and they give you your sense of self, and this is what usually the word I refers to. And most people don't realize that there can be a deeper meaning to I, a deeper sense of identity than one that consists of your personal history. And meditation, in a wider sense, or the meditative state, is here to help you realize that there's more to you than your personal history or the story in your mind about who you are, which may be predominantly great, that may be a fiction, but I'm better than most people. It may be predominantly negative, I'm a victim of everybody else, or it may be a mixed bag for most people. It's probably a mixed bag of good and bad. But if you never go beyond that sense of self, that's a very limited existence, but that kind of limited existence is normal. Whenever you watch movies and so on, it's usually about people who lead that kind of limited existence, although there are some movies occasionally where you see a glimpse of something else. That's the spiritual dimension, that's going deeper within, as we're doing now. So when we come to that, you may remember I said be aware of these silent spaces. Even though they may be short. And as you become aware of the silent spaces, your mind becomes still. Just for that moment, like this moment. Your mind becomes still means, of course, there is a cessation, a stopping of thought. The voice in the head, as I sometimes call it, suddenly stops speaking. There's no longer any mental commentary about what's going on here or now, and there's no longer a mental projection into some future moment like what am I going to have for dinner or lunch or tomorrow. So what's left of you when there is that brief cessation of mind activity, but you have not gone to sleep. You are as alert as you were before. In fact, you are more alert than when you were engaged in thinking. And suddenly you go, oh. And for a moment, what's left of you is that alert presence. And the historical person has kind of temporarily disappeared. It's quite interesting. And without having any story in your mind to tell you who you are, you nevertheless get a very strong sense of beingness or presence. You can sense that there is a presence. And of course that presence is perceiving through that presence is the background to your sense perceptions. But right now you hear the voice, you see the image on the screen, but no particular commentary on it. So spiritual awakening is becoming awake to the aliveness of this moment. And becoming awake to the aliveness of this moment, the all there ever is, nothing else is ever going to come. You can wait for millions of years if you lived that long. Nothing is ever going to come that's not this moment. Your life will always be this moment. And it sounds, well, we know that. No, you don't. If you don't live it, you don't know it. Life is always this moment. You don't know this if you don't live it. It's only through living it that you know it. Otherwise, it's just a concept in your head. Yeah, of course, life is all at this moment. And then what's next? Where's the next moment? So you might as well then become friendly with this moment. If there's nothing else, be open to that. Don't stifle it with an excessive amount of judgments and interpretations and definitions, but be open to the aliveness of this moment. Open means there's a spaciousness here. So the shift is from a thought-based entity, which is the normal old way for humans, been for thousands of years, to a deeper entity that is based in awareness of presence, consciousness. So, because when you're not commenting on things compulsively, who are you? When you're not continuously thinking about me and my problems, at this very moment, let's say, pretend that you don't remember your past at this moment. In fact, you don't, because at this moment, unless you start a thought process, at this moment, your past is not here. You're just sitting here now. But pretend for a moment, actually, there is no past and there's no future. What's left of you? If I removed from your past and your future from you now, what's left? I remember nothing. What's left? I don't remember my name. Who are you? I don't know. But there must be something there. Yes, there is something there, but I can't say what it is. That's who you are. Consciousness itself. When you remove the content from consciousness for a while, then you realize that you are consciousness. When the content is thoughts and emotions and thoughts and thoughts, when the content comes back, it obscures the reality that you are consciousness, and you identify with content. And that's why some people have been able to awaken spiritually, because life took away their content. They lost everything suddenly. They lost their reputation, in other words, their name. It happens sometimes that life does these things to people. They lost their money, their possessions, they lost even their family. They suddenly were killed in an accident, a big earthquake came, everything lost, and they sit there, their house is in ruins, everything gone, and suddenly, some of these people suddenly had a deep spiritual awakening. Why? Because life took away all the things that they had identified with as themselves, as the me, and what was left was what we just did now, here, when I asked you to pretend that there's no past and future. We took away for a moment content from your life. And what is when you remove content, because content is going to disappear anyway. It's not permanent. Whatever content you have is impermanent in your life. Things come and go. Or as the Buddha says, it's impermanence is the word. Transient. Everything is transient, and that refers to content. So as long as you are identified with all the content in your life, that can go very quickly. Even your body can go very quickly. But if you just beyond content is consciousness itself, rather than what consciousness has identified with. And you are that. I am that. You and I, on that level, are the same. We are, in essence, the essence of who you are is consciousness. Everything else is added temporarily. It's a disguise. Consciousness disguising itself as this and that person.
appearing in this particular form. That's the play, Leela, the divine play of life, as it's called in India. And that's fine. The play is not to be rejected. But you can only enjoy the play of the phenomenal existence if you know what is beyond phenomenal existence. So it's only if you know who you are beyond all the things in your life, you can actually truly enjoy the things in your life while they last. And you don't need to cling, because you know nothing is going to last. Relationships, whatever. It's only very young people who think there are lasting things. Then you reach a certain age and you realize, oh, so many things have evaporated that I thought were permanent. And more things are going to evaporate. And a few more things are going to come and then evaporate. So not to live, and your life is no longer content-based, but essence-based. I'm giving you here in one little talk the entire essence of what spirituality really is all about. And that's what it is. There's not much else that you need to know beyond that, in the sense of knowledge, accumulated knowledge. It is now a question of living that. And if you don't want to live it, that's fine. It means you have to suffer a bit more until you're ready to make this shift, until the shift begins to happen. A human being needs to reach the point of readiness where they say, okay, I've done enough madness. I've suffered enough. I'm ready for the shift. I'm ready to say, okay, this moment is all there ever is. I might as well become friendly with it. Acknowledge it, give it attention, in whatever form it comes. Because the form is not the moment. It's the form that this moment takes, the now. It's not what happens. The now is not what happens. It's the space in which it happened. And essentially, that space is consciousness. Everything happens in the light of consciousness. You can say, as some philosophers have done, they question everything. Some philosophers have said, is there anything I can be absolutely sure of? Because everything can be doubted. I can doubt that you exist. You can doubt that I exist. It could be a dream. Who says we are not dreaming right now? Who says that us sitting here is not a dream? You cannot know for sure. But even if it is a dream, there must be something real there, because the dream must appear to something or someone. There must be a light in which the dream appears, a space in which the dream happens. So even if it is a dream, the one thing you cannot question is the fact of being itself. Being is. The being may be a dream, or it may not be a dream. But one thing you can be certain is that you are. I am is something that cannot be doubted.
So reading this is an invitation, really, to join him in that state of consciousness, of that alert stillness or presence. And not only as you read or listen, when I read it to you, it may also help you to, as you go about your life, to pay more attention to the seemingly insignificant, the little things. You may find this yourself when you, as you become present and you walk around, there's an acknowledgement of that extraordinariness of life, even in its seemingly most insignificant manifestations. And in fact, you become more interested in those things than in the big things. Often Krishnamurti would wake up in the night, early hours of the morning or night, like 4 o'clock, 4:30, and suddenly would go into intense presence, and he would perceive whatever was there to be perceived in the intense alertness. And he could be for an hour without any thought, just totally still. Here's a description of what happens when he's woken up by the cry of a bird in the middle of the night. It was long before dawn when the sharp cry of a bird woke up the night for an instant, and the light of that cry faded away. The light of that cry. Oh, by the way, he never uses the word I once in the whole notebook. He sometimes says one instead of I. One felt hot. Or sometimes he says you. You felt hot when he means I. It was long before dawn when the sharp cry of a bird woke up the night for an instant, and the light of that cry faded away. And the trees remained dark, motionless, melting into the air. It was a soft, quiet night, endlessly alive. It was awake. There was movement. There was a deep stirring with utter silence. Even the village next door, with its many dogs always barking, was quiet. It was a strange stillness, terribly potent, destructively alive. It was so alive and still that you were afraid to move, so your body froze into immobility, and the brain, which had awakened with that sharp cry of the bird, had become still, with heightened sensitivity. It was a brilliant night with the stars in a cloudless sky. They seemed so close, and the Southern Cross was just over the trees, sparkling in the warm air. That was obviously in India somewhere. So reading this is an invitation, really, to join him in that state of consciousness, of that alert stillness or presence. And not only as you read or listen, when I read it to you, it may also help you to, as you go about your life, to pay more attention to the seemingly insignificant, the little things, the miracle that's hiding in everything. A brief description here of the inner state that is the prerequisite for perceiving things in that always fresh, new way. What was necessary was a very sensitive, alert brain. He calls it brain, you could say mind, you could say consciousness. What was necessary was a very sensitive, alert brain which had stopped entirely, willingly and easily its chatter. It had become very quiet, the brain, the mind. It had become very quiet, seeing and listening without interpreting, without classifying. It was quiet, and there was no entity or necessity to make it quiet. The brain was very still and very alive. That immensity filled the night, and there was bliss. And sometimes he perceived, it only describes his state of consciousness, it is as if his state of consciousness, he also experienced it as being outside. And then he uses the term, when he suddenly says, the room suddenly was filled with, or the entire landscape suddenly became filled with, and he sometimes calls it the immensity, or he calls it the otherness, or he calls it the sacredness. This brief description here is probably in Switzerland. In the morning, walking in the woods above the stream, with the sun on every tree, again it was there, that immensity, so unexpected, so still, that one walked through it, marveling. A single leaf was dancing rhythmically, and the rest of the abundant leaves were still. It was there, that love that's not within the scope of man's longing and measure. It was there, and thought could blow it away, and a feeling could push it away. It was there, never to be conquered, never to be caught. And then he has second thoughts. He talks about the word to feel. The word to feel is misleading. It's more than emotion. It's more than a sentiment, than an experience, than touch or smell. Though that word is apt to be misleading, it must be used to communicate, and especially so when we are talking of essence. So he is struggling to find the right words to communicate that experience. And the word comes to him to feel, and then he says, well, it's not quite right, but we have to use it. And now here in this, suddenly the word essence comes to him, which he doesn't pick up again. It's here a couple of times and then never uses it again. But I love that, and I've used that myself occasionally. He talks of the feel of essence is not through the brain nor through some fancy. It's not experienceable as a shock. Above all, it's not the word. You cannot experience it. To experience, there must be an experiencer, the observer. Experiencing without the experiencer is quite another matter. It is in this state, in quotation marks, in which there is no experiencer, no observer, that there is that feeling, quotation marks. It is not intuition which the observer interprets or follows blindly or with reason. It is not the desire, longing, transformed into intuition, or the voice of God evoked by politicians and religio-social reformers. To feel demands the austerity of clarity, in which there is no confusion and conflict. The feeling of essence is the negation of thought.
The external events in your life really trigger the karma that you carry inside, and they become your reactions. And your reactions determine how you experience your life. So in a way, you could have the same thing happening to one person, creating a certain response, and the same event happening to another person, creating a totally different response. I can have, for example, when I had just written my first book, the publisher said, why don't you sign some books for some famous people? They might give you an endorsement. So I did, and they were sent out, and almost nobody replied. And I didn't realize at the time that those famous people, how many books and manuscripts they get sent every week and every month. Now I'm getting them. And now I'm the one who doesn't reply, because you just can't. It's impossible to read it all, even dipping in. They pile up. There's a backlog. I have now already several months of backlog to get through. So it's very hard, if not impossible. But I didn't know that. But fortunately, I didn't take it personally. Without having read the 4 agreements, I already knew this is not a personal thing. So it was not problematic. But I've had some instances where people have sent me books and they got extremely upset because they didn't get a reply. And they get more and more upset, and the letters became more and more angry. And then I became the worst dreadful person in the world. And those are old karmic patterns that people carry. The external event triggers the pattern. For some people, what becomes a huge drama for one person is an insignificant event for another. So how you experience your life is not really so much to do with what happens to you, but it's how you react, because every reaction determines the next thing that happens. So something goes wrong, you make drama out of it, and that creates more stuff. And this is how more karma gets created. How you react to a person determines how that person reacts to you. And so it's a reflection, in other words. You create, to a large extent, your life, not to a large extent, completely, your life experience unconsciously. And so to break the old patterns that create so much suffering, unnecessary baggage, I sometimes call it, that you carry around with you, so you meet it you interpret situations and people through the unnecessary baggage in your mind, that for that to be transcended or dissolved, that requires presence power. The presence needs to be there when the old patterns arise in your life. And that is there so you don't wait for the challenge and hoping that you can stay present, because you won't. Use it when you're not being challenged and invite presence into your life. In all those moments that are really precious, and that generates more than you. It's like almost like the equivalent on the physical level would be working out. You get stronger, so to speak. And so sometimes it's only a disaster that makes a person conscious. It has a potential of making a person conscious. It doesn't always, the potential is not always fulfilled. Often a disaster can make you even more unconscious and more unhappy. But potentially, any disaster, any great loss in your life can be the awakener. And then you see, for example, many people, when they fall seriously ill, they realize all the things they've been worried about and upset about are quite insignificant. And suddenly they realize, what was all that about? All the drama they have had for the past 10, 15, 20 years in my life? Nothing. It was just generated out of nothingness. Full, what is the Shakespearean a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is what many people's lives, unfortunately, boils down to. Full of sound and fury. And then they die. It was so important. It mattered so much. And then there's the gravestone. And it's almost a relief that they died, because all the stuff finally comes to an end. But does it? Maybe they continue in another dimension. More drama in the astral realm. So that is this, as I sometimes call it, the sword of presence needs to be there. And you practice in ordinary situations. And it's wonderful, because already there, the benefit is, it's not a preparation for when you're getting challenged. That also, but the benefit is already there in the moment, because the way in which you experienced even the ordinary moments, which before are so boring and routine, and not another, I have to go shopping again, and my laundry, do that again, and again. Even that is actually quite, when you really bring presence to it, every movement is actually, has a certain quality to it. You pick something up, put it in the washing machine. And suddenly no thinking, just a presence. And you listen to the noise, whatever noises are associated with that particular movement, and it's a pleasant experience. You could call it a meditation. And then you might lose yourself in the mind, and then you come back. So the alertness is there more and more. And that means the person subsides, the presence arises. So it's like the person is the seed that begins to dissolve slowly. It's still there. As long as you have a body, you're still a person. But it becomes transparent. So the seed, if you want to continue with that analogy, something comes through where the person was, something shines through the person. And that means your identity, and this is a wonderful thing, your sense of who you are is not derived from that particular person that you are in space and time. Your personal history is no longer gives you your sense of who you are. But your sense of who you are is the presence that you sense right now, that you are right now. That is who you are. Yes, you still have your personal history. It's fine. And don't forget it. You remember exactly what happened. But you don't go there unnecessarily trying in your past and continuously revisit, especially the unpleasant things or even the pleasant. Trying to revisit this pleasant time 5 years ago. That was so nice. And then you miss this moment. Or you revisit painful things in the past. And you derive your identity from something that happened, you did in the past, something happened to you, you achieved something. 10 years ago, I achieved something. Who cares?
Questions that people have sent in and voted on, that everybody wants to know the answer to, me including. If, let's say, we all love each other unconditionally, how can I decide who is to be my partner? Is this based on physical attraction? Isn't this a contradiction with this higher state of consciousness? Okay, so if you love everybody unconditionally, how can you possibly decide who is going to be your partner? That's the question. Because it seems then there's no preference anymore. Or if it's physical attraction, isn't there a contradiction? If you're in a higher state of consciousness, then shouldn't or not be physically attracted to anybody? Is that the implication, the question? Well, the love we're talking about, the unconditional love towards human beings and life forms, is see, what is it that you love in the other when you love unconditionally? You don't love their physical form, you don't love their psychological form, their personality. The unconditional love goes deeper. It's a transcendent love, that what you love is not the form, but the formless essence of the other. And you can only love that when you can sense within yourself, that dimension, the formless, when you can be still and present enough, and then look at another human being, and then you can recognize something. What you recognize is, for lack of a better word, the consciousness, which is the essence of the other human, as it is the essence of who you are. Consciousness prior to the consciousness being born into some kind of form, personality, which is there, and the physical form, which is there. But in every being, there is still the dimension of consciousness that is prior to form. Although the human being has become form, consciousness has assumed form, has incarnated, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that the formless and timeless consciousness is lost. It's still there as the essence. And when you can sense it in yourself, you can sense it because you are still and present enough. From that dimension in yourself, you can sense it in the other, and that is love. It's basically a recognition that in essence the other is the same as you. But then, of course, there's always, that is the transcendent dimension to every human being. In addition to that transcendent dimension, there is a form identity of every human being. Every human being has a physical form and an emotional form and a mental form. That's the inner, that's the personality. So the physical appearance and the personality consisting of mental, emotional conditioning and so on. So there are the two levels. The unconditional love towards all humans is the transcendent love. You love the formless, you recognize the formless as yourself in the other. But then you are still here as a form too, and the form may respond to another form. The physical, there can be physical attraction. It is not incompatible with the transcendent realization, although some ancient or not so ancient traditions may tell you that. It is not incompatible. You can have physical attraction on the level of form. You can also have an attraction towards the mental, emotional form of that other human being because it resonates with something in your own form. So that means you may be drawn to another human being physically or mentally, emotionally, because you resonate with that. And then perhaps you enter into a relationship. So that different levels operate. The transcendent remains. It can become obscured through excessive attachment, of course, to the mental or emotional dimension in the other. So in a relationship, the realization of essence identity, as I sometimes call it, can become obscured when form identity takes over completely, which could happen through the pain body, which could happen through emotional, getting identified with arising emotions and losing touch with the transcendent. Yes, that can happen, but it's not incompatible. Everybody's challenge is to balance the two in their lives, in their relationships, to relate to the other on the transcendent level, and at the same time, if it's there, on an emotional, mental, physical level. Without the transcendent dimension in a relationship, it's not ultimately satisfying and it cannot really truly work for long if the transcendent is missing completely in a relationship. It's physical attraction, and attraction between personalities is not enough to keep it going. It can be going for a while, but then it becomes frustrating, and you see more and more of the limitations of the other person. And the other person sees more and more of your limitations, which are always there. And when you live together, it becomes very obvious that the other person has his or her limitations. Now, as long as the realization of the transcendent dimension is there, that's fine. Those limitations can exist within the space of the transcendent, and they're not destructive of the relationship. Now, you may find it's sometimes easier to have this unconditional love towards people that you don't know so well than towards people with whom you share a lot of past. Because they're the past, the form identity of that person can be very powerfully there in your mind, in your interaction. So that's the challenge of being present with family members, parents, grown-up children, and so on. And of course, as you know, Ram Dass recommends, if you think you're enlightened, as a test, he recommends that you spend 2 weeks with your parents, and that will tell you whether you're really enlightened or not. Go and spend 2 weeks, stay with your parents for 2 weeks. In most cases, that is a good test, unless your parents are enlightened, in which case there's not much point in using it. It doesn't tell you anything. The feeling, first of all, needs to be acknowledged and accepted. You can't start with letting go, so you have to start with acknowledging it and accepting that it's there, because it's part of what is, the isness of the present moment. Mm-hmm. Whether it's an external thing or an inner thing, it is what is. And to deny or to argue with what is creates suffering. So you acknowledge, you accept that it's there. Then, how much time you need to be with it varies from person to person, and what kind of a feeling it is, and so on. And then the question arises, what is the link between that feeling and your thought processes? The person needs to find out whether the thought processes keep that feeling alive continuously, whether they renew by playing out, for example, a past scenario in their minds, by reviving memories from the past, by dwelling on certain narratives that are painful, repeating them in their minds. That gives renewed energy to the feeling. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing is to be aware of both levels. What's the level of my thinking? How does that contribute to the perpetuation of what I feel? And so you also then acknowledge that, oh, these are the habitual thought patterns that go through my mind in relation to the feelings. And then you would begin to realize that the letting go, the most important step in letting go of feelings, is to cut the link between your thinking and what you're feeling. How do you do that? You do it by being aware of your thinking and realizing that that thinking is pain. It feeds the old feeling, and the narrative, whatever it is a painful narrative, and you realize that you've been keeping it alive for some years, and when there's enough awareness, you realize that it has no purpose except to make you unhappy and to perpetuate that feeling. However, you need, and this is how you can help, or any counselor or therapist or spiritual teacher can help the other person by observing the feeling and seeing how the mind, the mental narrative, has both the mental narrative and the feeling seem to have a life of their own. And if they have been in there for a long time, they don't want to go. What they want is, they want you to be identified with them. They don't want you to be conscious of them. So this is really the mind aspect of the pain body and the emotional. The pain body is predominantly an emotion, but there is a mental aspect that the pain body needs to rise up into your mind in order to feed on certain types of thinking, in this case the old narrative. So you also need enough awareness to know that this thing does not want to go, because there's a momentum behind thought patterns that have been active in your mind for a long time. So there's a momentum behind it. So you need to be acutely aware of the process of how it creates further pain. And when you look through it and see that's actually what it does, then you've recognized you cannot be deceived anymore by completely believing in it every time it happens. In other words, you see that you create your own pain ultimately. When you see that, that's the beginning of the end. And then you can reach a stage when the pain is no longer, the feeling is no longer fueled by thinking. Then you arrive at a stage where you realize, I don't need the feeling anymore. In fact, you don't need to let go, because then when you do not revive it continuously, it subsides by itself. So you don't need to actually say, I must let go. It lets go of you rather than you need to let go. It's because you're no longer giving it energy. You're no longer feeding it. So that's the process. So you need to let go is a bit like saying you need to forgive. That's another one like that. You need to really need to forgive. Okay, I'll try. Have you forgiven your parents? Yeah, I think I have. But the forgiveness again is in a similar way happens naturally when first of all you realize that no human being can act beyond their level of consciousness at that time when they acted. So if you haven't forgiven your parents, then you can see they behaved the way they did because they could not have done otherwise. My father, for example, I loved him dearly, well, especially after I became conscious. And before I became conscious, I had a love-hate relationship with him. I found him very obnoxious, but there was love there too, emotional love. But then, when I was free, I could love him unconditionally, and then I could see that pattern in him that produced so much, gave me so much pain, his uncontrollable anger. Mostly, fortunately, not directed towards me, but directed towards my mother. But the anger that was directed by my father towards my mother hurt me probably more than it hurt my mother as a child. And his anger was so explosive, it could flare up at any moment. So we were always walking on eggshells. And when I was 7, 8, I already knew, my mother seemingly never learned it, I already knew what comment that she made would immediately produce the anger. I knew that when I was 7, she never learned it. And so I was ready, I was listening to my mother saying, oh no, she's saying that. And so there was, I had a dream when I was 7 or 8, I was asleep and had this dream, and in the dream there was a bag under my bed, and in that bag were the body parts of my dad. I had cut him up and had put all his body parts in and hidden it under the bed. So the actual cutting up wasn't in the dream, that had already happened somewhere else.
You're just cleaning up?
Yeah. So I was pushing him under my bed, and then still in the dream, at that moment, I heard the front door opening, and my dad was coming in, and I ran towards him and gave him a hug. So that shows the conflicting feelings. And then later I realized where that anger came from. I don't need to go into this. Of course, it goes back to childhood, how he was treated in his family, the 7th child, the youngest child. Nobody wanted him anymore. The mother was tired. He wasn't given much attention, not treated well by his sisters and so on. Long story, don't need to go into that. It came all from there, it originated from there, anger towards his mother and so on and so on. And later I realized he could not help himself, he did not have the awareness. He got taken over by this anger. And the moment I realized that he acted according to his level of consciousness at the time, I didn't need to forgive anymore, because there was nothing to forgive anymore. And that's a beautiful thing. So again, similar to letting go of feelings, when enough awareness comes in, the feeling lets go of you, or becomes transmuted into something, an energy field that is good. And so forgiveness, again, cannot really be practiced in the same way that letting go can't really be practiced. It just happens, and then that's how it is. So at first, the being dimension, you find it as separate from external activity or thinking. And then that's a good beginning. And then gradually you learn that it is not irreconcilable with external activities. It's like presence through movement is a good practice, because it shows you do not need to sit still to find stillness, which is another word for it, which people believe initially. Stillness also has kind of two meanings in English. There's, on the one hand, stillness means the absence of noise, but there's another meaning of stillness is the absence of movement. You say, sit still. It's the absence of movement. He stood still. He sat. So it's stillness points in English to the absence of either noise or movement. So when we talk about stillness, you might think you can't move in order to be, to consciously sense the being dimension. You mustn't move. And then you learn you can actually move, and in fact it can be helpful. You begin with that. And then you can perform certain tasks and still be in that connectedness with being instead of completely losing yourself in the activity. You can have goals to pursue, which is in the realm of doing. It's good to have goals, although there may be periods in your life when you don't need any goals. Certainly if you reach a certain age, it becomes increasingly pointless to pursue goals, at least at the latest by the age of 95. You don't need to pursue any more goals unless for some reason you have to. But even before then, there may be time periods in your life when the pursuit of goals is not necessary, and you can become more deeply immersed, just be engaged in ordinary everyday activity without pursuing any particular big goal, big or small, working towards something. But on the whole, it's good to have goals, but again, goals belong to the realm of doing, and that's fine. The problem arises if the goal absorbs so much of your attention, the meaning, the desired outcome, the place you want to arrive at, whatever that may be, passing an exam, achieving a certain position, acquiring mastery in some activity, whatever it may be, the desired outcome. If the desired outcome occupies a place in your mind that's overwhelming, or you desperately need to go to arrive at that place, then in the meantime, all the things that you do, the steps you take, the activities you undertake in order to arrive at your goal are then simply a means to an end. They are not enjoyable because you desperately want to have arrived already, to have attained that already. Some ambitious people are like that. They are, what's the expression, consumed by ambition. This is almost literally true. And desperately need to. And in the meantime, they're very unhappy while they're working so hard or whatever they do to achieve their goal. And not only are they unhappy and full of anger very often and irritation when things don't go the way they want them to go, when little obstacles arise, as they always do, often in the form of people. So obviously, rather than get angry, so the entire journey is a place of unhappiness and stress and turmoil and often toxic emotions. And not only do they make themselves happy, they make other people, whoever's around them, is also unhappy. The entire company, if it's a big business, the entire company is unhappy, basically, and stressed. And so, although there is a saying that in order to achieve anything in life, you need to learn to, what's the expression? I think it's to delay gratification. There's some truth to that, some truth. You can have one young person studies to go to college and studies in the evenings and only goes out occasionally. Then the next door neighbor can't be bothered, wants immediate gratification and starts drinking and indulging in not only intoxicating beverages but also in substances and whatever, hangs out in clubs and drinks, and what's the point in doing anything? And a few years later, the one who delayed gratification achieves something, and so that seems to be true. The danger is, though, with that recipe of delayed gratification is it becomes a mindset in you that you cannot get rid of after a few years of practicing delayed gratification. You never arrive at gratification, except very briefly, and then you have to delay again because you have another goal that consumes you. That's the danger. So and all that means there's an absence of, that it's not balanced. The life is not balanced by the being dimension. You're so obsessed with doing and arriving and achieving that you cannot appreciate whatever is here at the present moment. It's like you're on a hike and you want to go to the top of the mountain or whatever it is, the final destination. You're determined to do it in 6 hours. I'm going to do it. I'm timing myself and I'm going to do and on the way you see the most beautiful flowers and the sky and incredible marvels of nature. You don't see any of that because you desperately want to arrive. This is your task. And finally you make it. But what was the journey like? It wasn't that great because you didn't see all the beauty around you. You couldn't stop and, as the expression goes, you couldn't stop and smell the flowers. Because if you could stop for a moment, there's the being dimension. It's present moment. It's inseparable from the present moment, from acknowledging the present moment. That's the portal or the entry point into the being dimension is the present moment. If you miss that, you might have certain successes, as what the world calls success. You might have certain successes in life, but fairly pointless, because the whole journey was a journey of unhappiness, and even when you arrive, you're still a stressed out being. I'm not necessarily saying everybody is successful, so that there may be some humans who are able to balance being. In fact, there are. I've met a few who are very successful in the world, nevertheless are not lost in the activity, still being able to appreciate the present moment. And then, what about the delayed gratification then? How does that work? Well, is it possible to change your attitude and instead of saying, okay, I have to delay gratification, are you able perhaps to enjoy whatever activity you engage in that before you call delayed gratification? Are you able to enjoy, if you start, let's say you're studying for an exam, or you're just learning to play an instrument and you want to get good at it, and other people are playing around and you are practicing, are you able perhaps to experience gratification even with the practice before you arrive at mastery, even at the very beginning? So it is possible to many tasks can be performed in such a way that you don't need to delay gratification. Your attitude towards the task can change so that the task itself becomes satisfying already in itself. And then you don't need to delay gratification because the gratification can already be here in the present moment. Many things can be actually enjoyed, although the world may tell you this, you're doing this in order to arrive. It's only a means to an end. And when that becomes a mindset, then your entire life becomes a means to an end. Where is the end? You never arrive. What is it? So you are transforming, converting, reducing the present moment to a means to an end. The only thing that ever is real. You're saying, well, I'm just trying to get there. This is just a stepping stone. That's the unconscious pattern. I'm trying to get there. Here is never good enough. Why is it not good enough? Because the true goodness derives from that inner place, the recognition of being. That's the source of all joy or happiness.